We are delighted to have a special guest here in our house this time. And this gentleman's name is Roy Norman. Now, I know from what his daughter told me on the phone that he lived in Marshall County a while, even though I don't think he's living here now. Mr. Norman, welcome to our microphone. And were you born in Marshall County?
Oh, yes. I was born right close to Pelham, about halfway between Pelham and Sharp. I showed the, Norma there. I showed the house that I was born in. It's still there, just before you get to the Bethlehem Cemetery Lane.
Yes, sir.
I was born right in that house.
That'll be strike a lot of memories to many people. Would you tell us how long ago that was that you were born there?
6th day of May, 1895.
That's been a good long while.
It has been, as the old saying is, there's been a lot of water under the bridge since then.
Yes, sir. And how long did you live in Marshall County?
I lived in Marshall County until 1935.
So you stayed here a good, what you thought was maybe the best part of your life.
Yes.
And where do you live now?
I live in Michigan, live in the city of Detroit.
Were you one of those fellows that during the Depression decided you couldn't make a living here and went away? Well, a good many people did that. Thousands of them. In fact,
I know there was.
My father went to Chicago and worked for the Illinois Central Railroad one time.
I left the farm in 1919, and then my uncle and myself, we put in a little flouring mill there at Palma.
A flour mill in
Little flour
Palma.
mill.
Now, I
Well,
hadn't
these
heard
midget
that.
mills, they were all over the whole country, made in Owensboro, Kentucky. Well, then we moved to Calvert City, and we moved the mill there, and then in an old tobacco warehouse. It used to be a tobacco warehouse. They used to prize tobacco there.
In Calvert?
Calvert City, yes, they did.
I never heard of that before either.
Well, I don't know who the man was. Of course, I remembered when I was a small boy. And then we had problems there. It burned out. And then that was my father-in-law, L. Roberts, was working there with us too at that time. Well, then he didn't go back with us, and we rebuilt a modern mill.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Now, before we get too far astray here, and I want to get back before I forget some
you'll
things.
have to do.
You tell me who your mom and dad were.
Yes. My father was Thomas H. Norman.
And your
he
mother?
was born in 1866 in Tennessee, near Cottage Grove, Tennessee. And they moved to Kentucky, and the whole family moved in 1870. And my mother was a Bryan, and she was born, well, it's in the Bryan settlement, and what they called. No, it wasn't, not Bryansburg. It's where Toad Bryan and all those, they were born. I don't know what they call that there. It's close to the Sandy Faust property and Tom Powell's property.
Well, that'll locate it.
I don't know just what it is. I know we used to go through a little place they call Stroudstown. That's close to North Marshall, where the school is now. That road that turns east there, that goes right up by the house there where the Dunn place.
Yes, sir.
And then you go about a half a mile up there where you come up to the places, and there's where the Stokeses and the Bryans and the Fauces and the Tom Powell.
All famous people in Marshall County history.
Well, yes, there were. They were all raised. I mean, they had farms there. I don't know whether they were all born there or not, because you take the Bryan family. Let's see, what ain't Cat you did say about that. I don't know. Just I'll not go into that because I've done forgot just well, it's been many years ago when they settled there, and that's
You
where my
remem-
mother was born.
You remembered it real well. Did you go to a one-room country school?
I certainly did.
Do you remember what it was?
I certainly do. Remember the first day that I was there as well as I'm sitting here.
Well,
It was
good.
Palma.
Palma School.
Shotgun. I know who the teacher was. Boone Hill.
Oh, now I remember Mr. Boone Hill when I was
Boone Hill.
young, and he was chairman of the Board of Education.
That's right. A smart man.
Yes, sir. And he worked for the
And he was a community
Tobacco
man. I
growers
can
and,
tell you he was.
Rural Electric.
That's
He
right.
did everything.
Everything.
Helped the county, I think.
Anything that was good for the county and good for people and the public, Boone Hill was for it. And if you thought it was wrong, he was against it. I know.
hmm Well, you certainly had a wonderful teacher. What did you like best in school? Reading, writing, or arithmetic?
Well, I can tell you what I could make the highest grade in was geography. I'm not bragging, but when I quit school, I knew the old advanced geography, and I have one in my home and today, just like I studied. I think I knew it almost by heart.
You probably know more about geography
But
than
I can tell you
today's
the worst
average
one.
student.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but
Well, they
had
don't
some-
teach it much
we
anymore.
had some good students when I was in school. We had some that wasn't, just like all schools are today.
hmm Well, that's fine. Do you remember anything about some of the games you played and enjoyed?
Yes, I do, very much. And I was thinking about that this morning before I got up, because they'd already said to making arrangements for me to come up here.
I'd probably
just kinda-
ask you something like that.
I just kind of, laid there and thought about something. We used to have a game that the boys played. They called it town ball. Had a small rubber ball about like a golf ball, and you take that and with a round bat. We used to could knock it clear across the highway over into Felix Franklin's orchard and field there. And then we played another one with a hard ball. They called it two-eyed cat. That's one when they went out and selected the people, all your buddies, the best one. Players got the first on it like that.
Oh,
And that-
did you take the bat and put your hands on it one above
That's
another
right. That's
until
what I'm telling you. Select
Uh-huh.
select who was going to be at bat first.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
They called it two-eye cat. Now I don't know what it is. It's kind of like baseball because you get three. No, you had three strikes. You were out, and you could get called out at the base. But this rubber ball, that town ball we call, you could throw the ball, and I remember that you could cross them out and get the guy out.
Oh, you threw it ahead of them.
Oh, you threw just hard ahead of him, and you.
They were out
If it
then.
crossed the line where that he was traveling from one base to another way, he was out.
Quite similar to baseball, but you had
Yeah.
an additional way to get
That's
people
right.
out.
We didn't select players for that.
Uh-huh. Just took what you had in school.
Yeah. And the girls, I don't recall very much that they had, because I know in this two-eyed cat they called it like that. And now the girls played in that.
Were you interested in girls then?
No.
You
Just-
weren't then. Well,
Oh, I just had a friend. I just telling John, I went with Grace Powell all through. We went just buddy together all through school,
uh-huh.
and then when I got 18 years old, I quit school, got through. Then Dad bought me a new buggy, rubber-tired buggy, and I had a nice horse, thing like that.
Say, you were a sport then,
Well,
weren't you?
I wouldn't say that, but I had, I tell you, I had a, I slipped my mind now just a minute. Buggy made in Henderson, Kentucky. It was
Just a Delker?
Delker's right. You had a Delker buggy, then you had a George Delker buggy, then you had a genuine George
Delker Brothers.
Yeah, and that was a Cadillac.
Someone told me there were three different buggy companies in Henderson, and all were Delkers of one kind or another.
Right. There were all families associated, all of them were. And I had a genuine George Delker.
Now that was the top line.
That was the top line. That was a good line. Keep it washed and shine like an automobile. And I did, too.
Oh, that's good. Now,
even had that buggy for 2 or 3. Well, I used that buggy about 4 years after I was married. Well, we lived on a farm.
When you got out of school, what did you do to make a living first?
Farm.
You farmed.
Farm.
And you raised what?
Most of the money crop was tobacco.
Dark-fired tobacco.
That's right.
Was that an easy crop to make?
No, sir. No, sir.
When did you burn a plant bed?
February.
And then you sold the tobacco in February,
We sowed the seed there, and then when them plants come up, why we put a canvas over them to keep the frost from biting them.
Yeah. Then you had to pull all that out.
You had to pull them out and transplant them. That was another hard job.
You didn't have an automatic tobacco setter.
No, there was only a few. I've seen a few in my lifetime, but my dad, he wouldn't have one. He said it was harder work to do it that way than it was to plant it by hand.
The small crops we had, I suppose it was. In fact, in those days, I didn't even know there were such things as tobacco setters. We used a cedar peg.
That's right. That's right.
And you set 3,600 hills to the acre.
That's right.
When you bent over that many times, your back began to hurt.
Well, I had a bad back all of my life.
Did your hand ever blister?
Oh, yes, sure blister it. I had a mini blister on my hand.
All right, you farmed with your dad for a while, and then when did you get married?
Well, I got married on December the 25th, 1916.
That, too, was a good many days ago, and were you and your wife able to live together a good long while?
Nearly 64 years.
Well, say that's way beyond the golden anniversary 50, isn't it? That
sure is.
That is wonderful.
And I can say one thing, and we never had an anger fuss in that whole years. Not a one.
And you were blessed with some children, were you?
3.
And
2 boys and a girl.
Are any of them living?
2. Just lost my oldest one, 11th day of July.
Now, where do your children live?
The oldest one that died lived in St. Clair Shores, Michigan. That's a suburb of Detroit.
So that is up near you.
On the lake. He lived right on the lake, St. Clair. Thomas, or we call him Martin. His name is Thomas Martin Norman. He lives in Dearborn Heights, which is about 5 miles west of where I live in Detroit. And then Janet, the daughter, she lives in Madison Heights.
That's also Michigan.
That's in Michigan. That's a suburb north of my house, about 20 miles.
Are you living with her?
No, I'm living alone.
By yourself, so you're still able to...
Still able to cook, wash, iron,
and
mow my grass.
I can say for the benefit of the listeners that you look to be about 60.
I don't know. The only way I see myself in the looking glass, and I think I look pretty horrible sometimes.
Nice pink skin and so on.
Well, I was naturally always a little bit red-faced and was so... My skin in spring of the year come always, it was so white I just blistered and sunburnt very badly.
Well, several of us have that problem. I never tanned real well. You have blue eyes, don't you?
Yeah, gray, or what it got, bluish gray, I guess.
I knew a Norman once, a fellow named Jewel Norman. Did you ever hear of him?
I guess I do. I'm a cousin. I guess I know him.
Cousin, all right. So,
he's a preacher.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Still living, I think, in Paducah.
I believe that's correct. All right, now, you and your wife married. Did you still keep farming after?
Yes, sir, did. I farmed
And you lived in the Palma neighborhood.
Yes, my farm joined my father's farm.
Uh-huh.
I had a small farm when we married. It was over on the Needmore Road there from Palma. Of course, you may not know where it is, but the people that lives
In that area,
there knows
certainly
where
will
it's
know.
at, yeah. I live back there about half a mile from where the Needmore Road comes into 68 there. Of course, the old Palma School's gone.
How did you meet your wife?
I believe it was church.
Met her at church. Well, that's a good place to meet someone.
Well, when Eddie was a baby, her father and mother lived on the Walls farm, sharecropping, where my sister lived.
You have your
Before
sister
she
with
went
you?
to Calvert City.
What's her name?
Ruth Dees now. She
Mhm.
was Ruth Norman.
Mm-hmm. Did
She's the youngest.
Was she a matchmaker?
No, not that I know of.
Yeah. Well, okay. There was a Broadway play called The Matchmaker.
Yeah, I know that.
So, all right. So you met your wife at church, and then you farmed. And what sort of house did you have then? Did you have electric lights?
No electric lights. Burn wood, and old fireplace to heat the house, and burn wood in the cook stove to cook.
Mhm.
Was this place that we began housekeeping in was a place that I'd known all my life, and my father and mother had known all the life, and when I married, well, we didn't have any place to go, and so we expected to go up in the little park there in front of the house. The park is still there. Ruth knows where it is. Dad had a good tenant house, a real good. He quit having any tenants on it. We used to use it only to strip tobacco in.
Mhm.
He kept it clean. He was a real first class carpenter. And we aimed to fix that up and married in that. We had that all arranged made. Well, in this farm, it joined our farm and Dad's farm just across the apple orchard. There's a fellow and his wife lived there. Was Jack Henson that married Nonnie Pace.
Mhm.
I think she was raised around Scale or Branchboro. And I don't know where Jack was raised. He was a big blonde-headed man, bigger man than me. They couldn't get along, and they separated several times. They had one little girl. Wirt Bertle, W.W. Bertle, he lived across the road from there. And we was going to staying upstairs there at my dad's, because he had a two-story house that we'd built in 1906, I believe it was, I remember. But anyway, Mr. Burdell that lived across the street, he was always coming across talking at supper time,
Mhm.
because he and Mother were raised together over in that part of the country there. And so he come in and he told me, he says, "Roy," says, "I've got just the thing and just the deal for you and Ellie." I said, "Yeah." I says, What do you got, Mr. Bertle?" He said, "That place right across the apple orchard there." He says, "Jack and Nonnie have separated for good. They're not going to live together, and he's going to sell the place." And says, "I stuck my neck out and talked to him about you."
Mhm.
Of course, he didn't care who he sold the place to like that. But he says, "I can tell you I can get it for a little less money than anybody else can get that place." Well, he was a good friend of Mr. Burdell. And we bought that place. We moved in it. 7 rooms. 7 rooms for us.
That was a fancy house for those days.
Well, it was a
wasn't it?
good house. It was nice. Been kept up, painted.
You had living room, dining room, kitchen, parlor.
We didn't even use the upstairs, and we didn't use the parlor, they used to have, the hallway. Well,
Yeah.
there was a big parlor. We never did use that.
That's what I'd call a fancy house.
It was fancy for me
Yeah.
at that time. But I was pretty fortunate in a lot of ways back then. If I was a boy, I was a hard worker.
All right.
I worked hard all of my life, and
What finally made up your mind to leave this county and go?
well, I'll tell you, all the prices, after World War One was over, just went to pot. The farmers couldn't sell tobacco. Well, I didn't owe but very little on that place because I'd sold $1,900 worth of tobacco in my part off of that little place that I had. It didn't have any building on it. Well, that put me in pretty good shape because I only paid $2,600 for the place with a 7-room house and about 10 or 12 more acres of land on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't do too bad on that. In fact, it was a pretty good start, I thought.
Yes,
But I had to get off the farm. Well, I didn't have to either. It's hard work, and I was going to diversify in the farming because you just had to quit tobacco. You couldn't sell it and didn't bring any money or anything like that. So we were going to raise some strawberry and like that. But of course, Dad and I, before I married, he'd always bought up these calves or cows or yearlings, they called them.
Self-dealers.
And he'd pasture them, and for a year or two till he got them fat, and then he'd sell them. That's what we done. We had, I don't know, when we married, we had 8 or 10, 12, I don't know how many.
So you were diversified then. You didn't depend 100% on tobacco.
No. I didn't raise as much tobacco as I'd been raising at all. The last crop that I raised 3 acres.
Did you ever have that strawberry crop?
Never did. I never did live there long enough to get it out.
We made a little money off the berries, but that's pretty hard work too.
It's hard work. It's hard. It's just like
Scraping the weeds
sitting
out of
back and worse than that.
Crabgrass.
I never did get that far along. And then, well, back then, these country mills were doing pretty good. Now you take there at Sharp, down below us, Roundtree. I tell you I forgot his first name. Marley Roundtree.
Mm-hmm.
He had one of those midget mills. He just worked alone, him and one man, and he made good money out of it. He told me he did, and I know he did.
Yes, sir.
But we got into it, and then we got into a little bigger way in the milling business because we handled a lot of feed, handled lots of it, carloads.
Sold some laying mash.
Oh, laying mash. We bought it with a carload
Yeah.
and sold it. Things like that. But as the time went on there, the big mills began to close in on all of that. They had laws passed by the state legislature that you had to wash wheat, and they do now.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they got that all over the country, and then the people began to buy loaf bread. They began to quit making biscuits,
Yes,
corn bread, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a complete mill for cornmeal and everything. Then
As
besides
life has become easier, it's hurt the little merchant
it
manufacturer.
completely run them all out because I've been out in Michigan, and mills there that they made fortunes out of. Their families got rid of them because they couldn't sell them. They didn't tore them down.
What did you do in Michigan?
Well, when I went to Michigan, the first thing I did, because I was a good miller for that time. I know I was, not bragging, but I know I was because I know from the type of flour and stuff I made as it was good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I went down to the big Hinkles mill there in Detroit, and walked in the employment office and got a job in 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Because they didn't have a packer or anything in like that. We had packers just like we had in our mill and stuff like that, and they'd give me a job. I couldn't go on the grinding floor because I didn't have a college education.
But a lot of people, most people left here went
But then
into
I tell you, then
the auto plants, and so you went to a place where you could just
I know,
get
I
a
had to
job
have
right
it.
off.
I didn't have a thing. I lost everything that dollar had. And Hurley was my partner, and he did too. He lives in Benton. I guess he's still alive. And
Yes,
then,
he is. In fact, I interviewed him not too
you
long
see,
ago.
he and I had a Chevrolet agency in Calvary City then. After I sold out of the mill, then that Great Depression dropped right in, and we bought the Chevrolet place that had gone, I guess it about gone out of business there in Calvary City. We thought we'd be able to have that because Harry was a real good salesman. I never was a perfect salesman, not a good salesman, I don't think, but Harry was. So we got in that and we got broke. I went broke, and I went to Detroit, and after I went down and worked at that mill, wasn't long till I was on the midnight shift down there. Then I'd leave there at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, in place of going back to where I was staying. I got on the streetcar and went out to the General Motors building. And before I went in out there, they had the service parts department for Chevrolet. It wasn't inside of the General Motors building. I went in there and see if I could get a job in that. And I'll never forget, the man was named Seeley, a young man. He was born and raised in Tennessee. And I told him a story. He says, well, I can tell you, Mr. Norman, he says, everybody and his brother's out of a job. You know it is. Well, they was. The streets was full of people. He said, but I'll tell you one thing that I'll tell you that I'm not supposed to tell. He says, you go to the General Motors building and go to the Chevrolet division. He said, don't you tell them who sent you. And go to a certain man's name, ask for it. And I walked in there, and the woman at the desk, that's just where you had to tell them your business. What's more, and I told her who I wanted to see. Well, by the way, I guess he must have been pretty well up in the company like that. Lo and behold, she buzzed that for whoever he was. Said, send him in. And I went in and talked to this man, a very nice talking man. I don't recall his name. Well, he just told me, he was just a good enough man. He told me, he says, I want you to sit down and tell me the story. And I did. I told him who the manager was that worked under Chevrolet out of the Zone 22 of Louisville, Kentucky. And Mr. Bryant, that was the General Motors representative for this area and stuff like that. I knew it. I wrote that all down, carried it with me, because that was the first thing that struck me, that I had to leave and get a job and had to go to Detroit. I was going to try General Motors.
I imagine you were one of the few people that had all those facts at hand.
Well, I don't know about that. But I
our time is about to get away from us. Do you have anything else you'd like to say, especially before we sign off? 30 minutes just zips by.
I know it is. Well, I'll tell you, I worked for, they sent me to the Cadillac division, and I worked there 29 years till I just got too old, at 68 years old, and the union run me out. Well, that's what I did. And I raised my boys, and my oldest boy, the one that died the 11th of last month, worked for the Chrysler division for 35 years, and for 30 years he traveled all over the United States and Canada at a high salary. And my other son, he's a one of the top servicemen for the Pepsi-Cola company, and he's almost old enough to retire about next year. And my daughter, she married a Vassar that was he was born in Pennsylvania, but his mother died there.
We've got about a minute left. Do you have any grandchildren?
Yes, I have, let me see. I've got one granddaughter. One, two, I got three grandchildren left. Oh, my daughter, she lost her oldest son 3 years ago with muscular dystrophy.
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, Mr. Roy Norman.
That's the second Mike I ever talked to in my life. I was just telling Ruth, I went out to the Northland a few years ago by myself to buy something on what it was. And that's the largest place in the country, shopping. And I went to walking along there, and there's a lot of shrubbery and stuff planted in there, you know, and flowers and like that. And a man walked up to me and stuck one of these right up in my face that way, and I couldn't imagine what in the world he wanted. I didn't see nothing around there like that.
Oh, these announcers
And,
will do anything.
He says, he says, do you know that this is pay your debt day? I says, no, I didn't. No, I never did. I didn't know what in the world he was driving at snow like that. Well, he says, do you owe any bills? Pay bills day. That's what he said. Do you have any of them? I said, no, sir. I says, all the bills I have are paid up. I says, I don't run no credit or anything like that. I said like that. He says, you know what you were on? I says, no. I said, I couldn't imagine you stick that up in my face, you know. But he says, look over here on me. He says, you're on Candid Camry.
Well, thank you very much. I wish we could talk longer, Mr. Roy Norman. Thanks for visiting in our home.